Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. I'm the Magi. That's right, I decided it was time to take an on screen persona. And it's that time again. It's midweek, and I want you to play some magic so you can win 2 free rare or better ICRs. And boy, do we have a good one for you today. This week's Midweek Magic, we're going to shake out the couch cushions and play a little Pauper over in the historic sandbox. And this isn't your usual Pauper event. There has been some recent ban activity that threatens to shake the format to the core and change everything. So stay tuned, folks. But before we get into all of that, my crack research team has recently pointed out that we are the only channel doing consistent and timely midweek magic content. And by crack team, of course, I mean one comment from someone who had nothing at all to do with this monkey image. So be sure to subscribe right here at the Planeswalker Stronghold for all of your future midweek magic needs, because we will be bringing you a deck list or strategy every single week. Now, what were we talking about this week? Oh, yeah, right. All right, so let's go ahead and start with that recent ban activity. The fine folks over at Wizards of the Coast, in their own companion app available for use on your mobile device in your app store, has announced that Island is banned in Pauper. Yep, seriously, that's really a thing that happened. I'm not bullshitting you. This is not clickbait. This really happened. Obviously, this can't possibly be real, but it did really get me thinking about the format. And since Island remains the best card in Magic the Gathering, I thought we should make it a focal point of this week's Pauper deck. And for that, we are going to reach way down in our bag of tricks to the 35th most popularly played deck in the historic queues, and that is Mono Blue Tempo. It may be the 35th most popular deck and off everybody's competitive radar, and for the most part, a lot of casual players don't even know how to play against this deck at this point. But it is boasting the second highest win rate of all historic decks. So it might be a little down in popularity, but it is still kicking ass, guys. And on top of that, Mono Blue Tempo is a fantastic deck at any level in historic. So this is a great opportunity to invest in some commons, artisan, excuse me, later on at some point will allow us to invest in some uncommons. And then, of course, we've got some rare wild cards for the year too that we might want to put into this, because I really believe that Mono Blue Tempo is the most historic, accessible, and best budget deck for historic for both 2022 and most likely will remain so for 2023 year. All right, so now that we know that Island is a perfectly legal card and why Mono Blue Tempo at every level is such a viable deck and a good addition to your historic collection, let's take a moment and go through the deck list. We start things off, as we often do in Mono Blue decks, with Mist Cloak Herald. He's a merfolk, he's a warrior. He goes in like 4 different budget decks from Mono Blue Tempo at every single level. Merfolk, Blue White Hammer, and I'm probably forgetting one off the top of my head. But anyway, moving on. Then we've got things like Bind the Monster, Bubble Snare, Sleep of the Dead, and see a guard approach. All of these are 1 mana cards that are mostly here to tap down a creature and let us get in for combat damage. In the event that we have something bigger or something that we really want to kind of sneak in. I have put 4 different versions of the same concept in here, not because there's any particular magic of running those 4 in combination. Although things like you see a guard approach do definitely give you some flexibility. Sleep of the Dead does give you some escape viability to recur the card and use it another time. But in essence, if you're going to spend wild cards on these, it's better to get 4 similar but slightly different things, and then you'll have them all for your future Brawl decks in blue that you may build at a later date. On the other hand, if you do have multiples of some of these cards, there's no reason to not run those and maybe skip on some of the wild cards. Moving on, Fairy Miscreant is one of the awesome blue Pauper cards. It's a 1/1 Fairy Rogue, so it does fit some interesting tribal aspects, but most importantly, when it ETBs, if you control another copy of Fairy Miscreant, you get to draw a card. And that won't often happen, but when it does, card advantage. It's a thing. From there, we've got a card like Fairy Seer, which, again, a 1/1 flying. It allows you to scry. This card wasn't standard available, so there was no point in time where you could draft this. It's a wild card only for 99% of people, but still a very good card and worth having that 1 copy for your Brawl deck as well as your Pauper decks. And if you really like the aspect of scrying here versus the possibility of a straight up draw with Fairy Miscreant, I really would not hate on you for swapping some of those cards back and forth, but there definitely is a diminishing value with Fairy Miscreant the more copies of that you take out. So if it was me, I would run 4 or nothing on Fairy Miscreant. From there, you've got your free copy of Pirate Opt, available with the code SUPERSCRY. If you don't know what the hell I'm talking about, when you get done with midweek magic, go watch my comprehensive codes video. You owe it to yourself. Then we've got a couple of cards that are actually available in standard, although for whatever reason I did not put in the standard version. Let me correct that right now. So for those of you who are downloading the list and just doing a direct upload, there's no need to spend wildcards on a particular version if you have another. And I know a lot of my viewership is much more likely to have the most recent copy. From there, we've got Unsummons, which is kind of a cornerstone tempo card. I'm running the 3 copies that you get in your mono blue new player experience deck because I know all of you have them. If you have similarly minded cards in your collection that maybe you like better or have some small cantrip style advantage to it, by all means switch those out. This is a direct effort to save wild cards. Also in the you can't have nice things counter options, I'm running 2 copies of Syncopate. Again, very available in standard right now. Similarly, Make It Disappear with its casualty 1 option. If you have a creature that you're willing to give up, Make Disappear goes from a soft counter to virtually a hard counter. Most people very early on are not going to be able to pay 4. A lot of them aren't going to be able to pay 2. So it does become a very good counter, and particularly if you're up against a, say, mono green ramp deck where they have done something ridiculous and they're they're cheating out a 4/4 on turn 3 on the play. This lets you say no in a grandiose fashion. Similar to Fairy Miscreant and Mistcloak Herald, one of the staples of the Pauper format is Wretched Throng. The Throng. When Wretched Throng dies, you may search your library for a card named Wretched Throng, reveal it, and put it into your hand, and then shuffle. So this replaces itself up to a point and is another form of card advantage. Tempo is all about those little incremental advantages and just taking those half step ahead here and there until you've won the game. Speaking of good tempo cards, another one of these, very much like Fairy Seer, is Mana War, a 3-mana 2/2, and when it ETBs, return target creature to its owner's hand. This is what tempo is all about, is building your board state and setting theirs back. Here you're doing it at the same time in a very grandiose manner. I would not hate it at all if you spent wild cards and got more than one copy of this, but again, I'm just recommending the one because it also allows you to play at Brawl, and we know how great that is. Cloudkin Seer is an evasive 2/1 flyer for 3 mana. Y'all are all familiar with this from your mono blue new player experience decks. And when it ETBs, you draw a card. It's got tempo written all over it. Tempo is the one thing that mono blue new player experience deck does pretty well. The only card in this that I would say may not 100% fit in this particular deck is Faceless Agent, but it was one of the historic wildcards that I recommended for the 2022 budget year. The reason for this is for 3 mana you get a 2/2 with Changeling, so it fits into all of your tribal decks, and it has some on-board card advantage in the form of seeking a creature card with the most prevalent creature type in your library. And honestly, I'm not sure what that is for this deck. Let's take a look here. It looks like Fairy, unless you happen to have drawn that and or drawn one of those, in which case then it's like a 27-way tie for Elemental, Horror, Human, Merfolk, Ninjas, Rogues, Warriors, Wizards, and Zombies. So not a tribal deck by any means. And of course, if you play with those numbers for things like Mana War or Fairy Seeker or Fairy Miscreant, those might shift a little bit, changing the possible utility, because it might be kind of nice playing that Faceless Agent, knowing you're going to get another copy of Fairy Miscreant 80% of the time, or maybe even 100% of the time, depending upon the cards that you've drawn. From there, we've got another one of these. You weren't able to draft this in the form of Moonblade Shinobi, one of our ninjas. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, create a 1/1 blue illusion creature token with flying. So more card advantage, more board presence. It's a 1/1 evasive flyer, and the really cool thing about this is it's actually cheaper to play it for its ninjutsu cost. So once you've got that 3 mana, it would be really, really awesome. Swing with something like your Mistcloak Herald that literally can't be blocked, or something that is evasive like your Fairy Miscreant or your Fairy Seer. Then use Shinobi to bounce that card back to your hand. It automatically gets in for combat damage, so instead of doing 1, now you're doing 3. You're creating another creature, so in essence, you've replaced the card that you bounced back to your hand, which of course you can still replay. And in the instance of having Fairy Miscreant, if you have one in play, or I should say, if you have 2 in play, bounce 1 back, 1 still remains, you can play the other one and get even more card advantage through that card draw. awesome on top of awesome, with a little awesome sprinkled on top, and a good dollop of awesome on the side of the plate. Can you tell I like that? Again, would not hate if you wanted more than one copy of this, but I highly recommend having at least one copy for those brawl related purposes. Moon Snare Specialist, we're running 2 copies on this, also with Ninjutsu, because you've got those hard to block, completely evasive creatures. 4 mana for a 2/2 is not the best stats in the world, but when you ninjutsu it for 3, it's much better. And when it ETBs, you get to return up to 1 target creature to its owner's hand. So again, let's think about a board state. They have a blocker down that is going to kill any of your creatures. You swing with 2 creatures that they can block. But they only have enough creatures to block one. So one's going to get through. You ninjutsu in your specialist here, and on its ETB trigger, you bounce their blocker, saving your second creature. Awesome on top of awesome tempo. I hope you guys are getting the idea and seeing just how powerful this combination of cards can be in a restrictive format like Pauper. And of course, we have the signature ninjutsu card in here. This is what most people think of in ninjutsu. This was also not draftable, but if I remember correctly, this was part of the Jump in Historic Horizons decks a while back. So you may have been able to get a copy on this in a very budget manner. Again, 4 mana for a 2/2, not the best stats in the world, but its ninjutsu is super cheap for just 2 mana. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. So again, you bounce that Fairy Miscreant using Ninja the Deep Hours, you draw a card off the combat, it's an island, you play it as your land for the turn, tap it, play your Fairy Miscreant, draw a card, tempo. And then we got one of my favorite cards from Lorwyn Block, because I'm old, is the 5 mana Mold Drifter, a 2/2 flyer, and those stats are pretty terrible until you read the line, when it enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards. So this ends up being pretty darn good. Getting to 5 mana can be difficult, just because this format can be very fast. Not only decks like this that kind of top out at mid-range, but also because there's a lot of aggro decks in Pauper, because it's just super easy. This deck is a little more 140 IQ, but it still turns a lot of things sideways. The nice thing about Mold Drifter is it gives you some flexibility, because you can use the Evoke ability for only 3 mana. You may cast this spell for its Evoke cost. If you do, it's sacrificed at the end of turn. It doesn't have haste, so it can't swing. And although it doesn't really apply in this deck, there is a lot of something blue decks out there, both in Brawl, both in Historic, Standard, well, I guess Standard doesn't really apply here, scratch that. Where a card coming into play has benefits and triggers associated with it, so you get even more value out of this. Again, I couldn't argue against you owning 4 copies of this card. It was not draftable. It was, again, available, I think, in one of those jump-in style deck lists for Historic a while back. So you might already have a copy, in which case that's freaking great. But I don't know that I'd run more than, say, 2 in this deck, just because you want to be really fast and lean. From there, we've got the mana base. We're running our standard 23 lands, 21 islands, a Lonely Sandbar, which, if you don't have it, I would not argue against you not spending a wild card on this. It's a great card to have, particularly for this deck, but it is by no means required. And the fact that if you have to play it as land and it comes into play tapped, that can be bad. Same with Mystic Sanctuary. The tempo can be a problem. It's not the most versatile card. It is very nice and at home in this deck. What was I going to say? You could easily cut both of these, save the wild cards, and just run 2 more islands. And really, what I would think about if you don't own these cards or you don't want to spend the wild cards on it, try running this deck with 21, 22 islands. It's very, very low curve. Most of your quote unquote 4 and 5 drops can actually be cast for 3 or less mana. So I envision a world where you could actually go arguably as low as 18 lands on this, and then you've got room to increase your threat density by having more copies of Fairy Seer, your Ninjas, your Mana War, your Mold Drifter, things like that. So it's a very versatile deck. This is probably the most budget-friendly version I could recommend. It's very accessible. Some of the play lines are a little complex, so don't hate on yourself if you miss things every once in a while. Keep playing the deck, keep learning it, and a lot of these cards, as we discussed, and not only will go into multiple brawl builds because of a really insane value on things like Mana War, Mold Drifter, etc. But a lot of these cards can also be used for spots that they've earned in Mono Blue, Tempo, the Aristocrats, or the full rare accessible no budget version of Mono Blue Tempo in Historic. So these are really, really great values. All right, so let's take a look at the cost breakdown for the deck. As we discussed, there's only 3 cards in here, bringing that to 5% of the deck that you absolutely would have to spend wild cards on if you so desire, because there's been no other way to get those cards. If you add in another 23% that your timing had to be right to get those cards without wild cards, you're still looking at a very budget approachable deck with 72% of the deck either being basic lands or cards that were easily draftable or part of your new player experience over the course of the current standard environment. And I can hear you already. There's folks out there that that's not true for. They haven't been able to draft standard recently. They're too new, whatever. But guys, let's face it, we're talking about 39 wild cards as written, and they're all commons. If somebody walked up to you at your local F&M and said, hey, that stack of commons there is really nice, I will trade you that for 2 chances to pull a rare or possibly a mythic out of this giant stack of rares. You got them pulling blind and just take what you get, but you get 2 pulls and you get to keep them both. You should absolutely say yes to that. That would be insane to say no. I did actually have someone say no to something like that once at an F&M when I was trying to be nice to the new guy. But hey, whatever. Pride goeth before the storm or something. I don't know. Literate people know what I'm talking about. But let's say you built this out one of the other ways that we talked about, and this jumped up to like 43 commons. Still 100% worth it. No doubt about it. You should do that. And let's not forget, when you redeem a wild card, you're not really giving up that resource. You're just trading flexibility and versatility of that wild card for the value of what you redeem it for. And when you've got semi-expert pro opinions on what are good things to do that, it's almost always going to be a win. And really, again, if someone who walked up to you at F&M, you should be going back every week and looking for that guy, trying to get that same trade again. And really, that's what we do here every week with Midweek Magic. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on the ridiculous values. And as I do with many of the recent midweek magics, if this video gets just 10 thumbs up likes by 8 p.m. on the Tuesday that it's released, I will be live playing this event over on my new Twitch channel. We'll be testing out the deck, see how it works, and maybe even do some on-the-fly tweaks there. So smash the like button and tune in. What's that? You didn't catch all that? Well, Matt would like you to know that any deck list applicable to this video can be found down in the doobly-doo. And hey, let's not forget, the whole reason to participate in these totally free midweek magic events is the prize support is awesome. You get a rare for your first and second win, and then you get a random cosmetic for your third. How awesome is that? All right, so with all that having been said, don't forget, smash the like button like Hulk would. And of course, comment and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And one last thing, myself, I'm coming to you from America, and I have noticed that about 1/3 of my viewership is coming from the US, and about 1/3 is coming from various countries. And there's about 1/3 of my viewership that is just getting lumped into other. So to let me know you got to the end of the video, throw me a comment down in there and let me know where you are watching from.